When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be getting to Ned XII. And this is a very important chapter. It's very influential on this channel. It's one of my favorite chapters in all of A Song of Ice and Fire. And yeah, we're going to be getting into the big reveal, right? This is where the mystery of the entire first book kind of comes to a head. We figure out what the entire plot has been about leading up to this point. There's still some other things going on, but you know, the whole idea that Jaime and Cersei are having an incestual relationship and that Robert's kids aren't actually his kids. And this is a big moment for a lot of speculation in the community about whether Ned was stupid to make this decision to tell Cersei. And so, yeah, very important chapter, very influential on, again, the creation of this channel. And so let's get into it. We're going to start on page 480. The chapter opens with Pycelle telling Ned that pain is a gift from the gods because that means it is healing, which, again, as a man who has back pain and has had it for months, I can tell you that is completely false. So Pycelle doesn't really know what he's talking about, but, you know. But Ned just wishes his leg would stop throbbing, and Pycelle gives him some milk of the poppy for the pain. And Ned notes he sleeps too much. And again, I think this is something that's very interesting, is because Pycelle could be trying again to stall time for Cersei, right? Trying to, again, make Ned sleeping a lot, putting him not in his full mind, again, giving him something that can dull the pain, but also will dull his wits, something we see with like Duran a lot in Feast. But yeah, so this kind of gets us into this point where it's like Ned is already, and this is something we're going to note quite a lot, is that Ned's not like stupid. He understands Pycelle is definitely like a Cersei crony. And so he very much distrusts Pycelle and a lot of things going on right now. But Pycelle notes that sleep is the great healer, which is true, again, that I noted to a degree. Sleep can be very beneficial. And Ned was hoping that that was actually Pycelle who was the great healer. And it doesn't seem to be the case right now. But Pycelle smiled and is glad his humor has returned, but he leans into Ned and whispers that a letter came to the queen from her lord father. Ned again notes the famous line, "Dark wings, dark words," once again, but asks what of it. Pycelle says that Tywin is most wrath with Ned, sending the men after Gregor, as Pycelle notes would happen, and he counseled against it. Again, this is Pycelle trying to save face, trying to save position. He is someone that is playing both sides at this point, right? Because if you think about it from Pycelle's point of view, Ned is someone that has a lot of power at this point, and there's a solid chance, and even I'd say probably 70-30 chance right now that Ned is going to win this war with Cersei. Again, Robert is still alive. Everything pretty much falls on the back of Ned, or of Robert being alive. If Robert is dead, then yeah, there's some things that Cersei's going to be able to do, but this is, again, Pycelle just trying to play both sides, really. Ned tells him to be wroth, and he thinks on how every time his leg throbs, he remembers Jaime's smile and Jory dead in his arms. Beric rides into the King's Banner. If anything happens, he will have Robert to contend with. And there is nothing he likes more than having war on lords who defy him. Again, Ned is using Robert as a shield, more or less. Like every action Ned is doing, he's doing it with the thought process of, once again, that Robert is still going to be alive. So again, when we look at the decisions he makes in this chapter, telling Cersei doesn't really matter. Like when you really think about it in the grand scale of things, as long as Robert comes back from this hunt and he's completely fine, which again, how is Ned supposed to think any different of, because Robert goes hunting all of the time? He's fine because, again, he tells Robert and that's it, right? That's the end of this. And so it's the same thing here, right? If Tywin moves against the King's Banner, it's Tywin basically saying that he's going against the crown. And so Ned, in a lot of ways, has actually been very smart in the way he's kind of used this. The problem is going to fall apart when Robert dies, and that's kind of what we'll talk about. And that's why, again, I made a video. It was one of the first really good videos I think I made on this channel. And it was a video talking about, was Ned stupid? Because it's something that I've seen a lot of the community really talk about and have. I don't know if it's a common, I wouldn't say it's like the common thought process. I'd say the more casual of a reader or a viewer of the show you are, you kind of lean towards thinking Ned is dumb, but when you really think about the rationale behind Ned, what he was doing, how he was playing the Game of Thrones, his way of playing the Game of Thrones wasn't really playing the Game of Thrones at all. It was about kind of taking the political game and turning it to the war game, looking at evaluating, okay, who is he going to have on his side? What can he get away with? What can he not get away with? Not really doing these battles with words and trying to cut deals behind closed doors and things like that. That gets us into page 481. Instantly, Pycelle pulls back, saying, as he says, and leaves the room again. This is just another moment that shows that Ned is not dumb, right? He knows that Cersei probably told Pycelle to tell him this, which is completely true, right? This would not have happened. Pycelle wouldn't have just straight up come to Ned and tell him this, but it's also a way of Pycelle being able to play both sides if Cersei gives him, you know, that option to tell Ned. But again, Ned kind of takes this as he thought this was supposed to be a threat towards him, and it's something that I think was intended to be that, but it's not really. Like, it's very, these are very empty words given the position that Ned has right now. But Ned was all too aware that Pycelle was probably on his way back to whisper to the Queen, which is definitely true. But more importantly, we see that Ned is not near as confident as he's kind of coming off, right? Because again, Ned's whole plan, his whole defense against the Lannisters is based upon Robert, right? Now, Ned has other things in place, right? But given where he is right now, he's in King's Landing, he's in a very dangerous position right now. Robert is the shield. If Ned was to say leave right now, okay, he'd be in a much better position. He could be in command of the North. He could prepare the Riverlands, you know, help take command there. He could try and maybe get the Vale into it, which wouldn't happen. But still, like, he is in a much better position there than he is actually in King's Landing. But again, Ned knows, like, he needs to play up that relationship with Robert. No one needs to know that because it gives him that illusion of more power. It's something we talk about a lot with Tyrion, for example, in book 2. So that's a great point, and I think it just really shows how Ned understands the position he's in right now. But Ned then calls for honeyed wine and thought on what Jon Arryn would do in this situation. What Jon Arryn would do in this situation, and if he had lived long enough to act on it, or if he had died before he could really do anything about it. But Ned notes how it was Sansa who had unveiled the truth. Again, I pointed this out in the last chapter, but Sansa has this note where she's like, Joffrey is nothing like Robert, and that kind of sparked those puzzle pieces all kind of coming together for Ned. And Ned even notes, like, it's weird how sometimes the child's eye saw things that as an adult you did not. And I found that really an interesting line because I think that's really true. I think sometimes kids see things that, you know, you don't, or kids may even just not like have a filter really when they're younger, whereas adults do. So it's like, maybe it's like a hairstyle, right? And or maybe it's the clothing you're wearing, and a kid's just like, that's kind of weird. And then you're like, wow, you know, the kid's kind of right, but nobody else is willing to tell you that. There's other better examples probably, but that's the one that came to my mind, I guess. But yeah, I think that, you know, makes a lot of sense. Kids just see the world differently than adults do. But at this, Littlefinger then comes calling an hour later in a hurry, as he was to meet Lady Tanda, but asks how Ned's leg is, and Ned notes very painful and an itch that may drive him mad. Littlefinger, being ever the clever guy, just telling him to maybe not let a horse fall on it, which is, you know, solid advice. And that it better heal quickly. The realm is growing unsteady. Sell swords and free riders are flocking to the west. And it almost feels like Littlefinger's like patting himself on the back. Like, it's weird because we don't know this yet. Like, we don't know like that Littlefinger is kind of pulling a lot of the strings here. But like, when you have hindsight of the actual story, it just feels like a line where like Littlefinger's just like, yeah, see, I'm doing all this, Ned. Like, let me just like flex it all to you real quick, while also kind of, you know, thinking I'm kind of your friend or whatnot, even though Ned doesn't really trust Littlefinger. I mean, that's very apparent even in kind of the next Ned chapter specifically, but still. Ned then asks for knowledge on when Robert will return from his hunt again. Everything, again, that Ned has planned revolves around when Robert returns. Littlefinger notes he probably intends to stay until the Queen and Ned die of old age, which, yeah, I don't blame Robert. There's just a lot of shit going on right now, and Robert's just kind of like, you know what, let me just kill things. It always gets the edge off for me, so I'm just gonna go kill more things. But Littlefinger continues that probably when he kills something though, but he notes that they found the White Hart. It had been killed by wolves, an omen of the future. Again, like I talk about, and someone had put a really good comment the last time I brought this up, is kind of a reverse omen, and I really do enjoy that. I think it's a really cool idea. But again, I think it just shows the illegitimacy of Robert and also, you know, Joffrey and then Tommen's reign to follow. So I think a lot of that is a nice little foreshadow, a nice little wink to the audience. But Robert had heard of a monstrous boar and wanted to kill it instead. And that would be his fatal flaw. If he had just turned back right now, things could be much different. But Joffrey has returned with some 20 men, including the Royces. Ned asks about the Hound, as he was the most worried about him. Again, think about when we go all the way back, when we have this whole conflict with, again, the direwolf with Lady and Nymeria and Arya, Sansa, Joffrey. Think about how Ned analyzes that situation, right? He's going, okay, the Hound and Jaime aren't here. Fantastic. They are the best Lannister fighters. He would rather them not be here if he has to fight his way out. That's kind of what he's thinking here, right? He's like, Jaime, okay, the best sword fighter, he's out of King's Landing. Fantastic. The Hound, you would love to see if he wasn't here as well. But again, he is Joffrey's sworn sword, so he's going to be here. But still, you know, it's a little win if you're Ned that Jaime is not here. Littlefinger says that he has returned as well and is none too happy as Ned has sentenced Gregor to die. You would think Sandor would be thankful for Ned as his position would go up, but up quite a bit. But the problem here is the Hound hates his brother. There lies the issue. Sandor hates him personally and is not satisfied if someone else does it for him. Again, makes a lot of sense. Hate goes a lot further than titles and things of that nature. And it's just who Sandor is more than like maybe an average normal person. Littlefinger then starts to take his leave when he notices the book that Ned is reading and says, a very tedious read. And Ned nearly tells him all of it. But here's the thing. Ned is smart enough not to do that, right? This is a really big secret. Now, the thing you could say here that Ned maybe is not so smart about is that he doesn't really figure out that Littlefinger already knows. Like, people like Littlefinger, Varys, these people probably already know. They know so much. How would they not know this thing? And so that is one thing I would sit here and go, okay, I mean, Ned, it probably didn't actually matter if you told, but probably better to keep it to your chest so maybe they don't know that you know already, but, you know. But again, Ned notes how Littlefinger is too clever and untrusting to do so. Again, we're only, you know, what, 3 chapters? We have 3 Ned chapters left, and Ned, it's still up to this point, does not trust Littlefinger. He's never going to come to trust Littlefinger. Like, that line when we get to when Ned actually kind of loses and Littlefinger's like, I told you not to trust me. It's one of those weird lines because Ned really never trusted Littlefinger. It's more like when you look at the Gold Cloaks situation, it was more that Ned had no other route. Like, there was nothing else he could really do when it came to if he's going to try and, you know, get control of the crown. That was the only way. He had no guard. His only other ally that possibly could have had was Renly, and he leaves, and so does Loras and all that. So it was the best shot he had. Ned instead tells him that Jon Arryn had been reading it before he died, and Littlefinger notes that death must have come as a welcome surprise then, and takes his leave. Again, it feels like Littlefinger, again, once again, patting himself on the back because he's the one that basically orchestrated that whole thing. But that'll get us into page 483. Ned then thinks how he can trust no one. Littlefinger had concealed Cat, but he was too untrusting. The way he had left to save his skin when Jaime confronted them. Varys was worse. He knew too much and did too little. Pycelle was Cersei's creature, and Barristan would tell him to do his duty. Again, Ned has perfectly figured out this entire situation, right? None of these people are trustworthy. He can't trust anyone, right? And that's something where it's like, if you think about Jon Arryn and Stannis' relationship, it's a lot because of that. And so you look at this situation and you go, yeah, Ned has pretty much completely dissected the situation perfectly almost. Ned knows that time was growing short. When Robert returned, Ned would have to tell him the truth about the children. And this is where Ned is going to think about kind of the last time we had this issue with children. Last night he had dreamed of Rhaenys and Aegon, the children of Rhaegar and Elia, how they had been wrapped in crimson cloaks, smart because it hid all of the blood. Ned notes he can't even think of Aegon, of how disgusting and cruel his treatment had been. Now, this is interesting to like point out because when we get to Fagon later on, and one of the things you can make as an argument for why he's a Targaryen is it's very interesting given that you can't like even recognize this is actually Aegon. This could have been any child and Robert would have believed it. The public would have believed it because you couldn't even really tell. They were all wrapped up and there's a bunch of blood. This was horrifying to look at. People didn't want to look at it, right? Like who would want to look at it like just a killed, destroyed baby? Like you're going to look away. Like you don't want to see that. And so The whole idea that Varys could have baby swapped them, could possibly have worked. Ned notes that he cannot let a second Mad King happen, and that this cannot happen to innocent children again. But Ned did note that Robert could be merciful. He had been to Balon Greyjoy, which was a mistake, by the way. Barristan, Varys, Pycelle all had been welcomed into the new realm and were able to retain positions as long as they showed bravery and honesty, or in my own words, this isn't Ned's, is convenient, right? I think for Robert, keeping Varys in that position is convenient. You don't have to replace a Master of Whispers, and who is going to be better than Varys to begin with? You don't have to replace Pycelle. You don't have to replace Barristan. All these things. It just kind of strikes me as being very convenient for Robert, and it kind of fits like him as a character, right? It's usually about convenience when it comes to his rule. That gets us into page 484. So moving on, but this was something completely different. This would be more personal and a great betrayal. Again, all of those other things had been either in warfare and maybe, they were just being loyal to their sides or whatnot. But this was different, right? Like, this was actively Cersei basically cucking Robert for years, right? Betraying him, lying to him. So again, it's going to be much different. And Robert would kill them all, Ned realized. Again, I can see this as Ned realizing, like, yes, I don't like Cersei, but all of these innocent children, Joffrey maybe not so much innocent, but Tom and Marcella, who are very much, sweet kids, it would appear to Ned. There's just things that Ned, at this point, he would rather not have them all die, but that's kind of where this is heading. But Ned could not keep silent. He had a duty to Robert and the realm. And I find this interesting because I do agree, like, that is what should be being done right now, right? But there's also a bit of certain bias here from Ned because, again, he doesn't like the Lannisters. The Lannisters themselves have committed crimes, whether that comes to throwing Bran out of a tower and things like that. So it is a little bit of biased as well, but Ned is in the right. Like, this should be something that he brings up to Robert. And even at this point, right, Bran is someone that Ned knows, like, he must have stumbled upon some part of this. He just isn't really sure. But the key point here is that Ned still believes that they tried to assassinate him, which makes a lot of sense. Now, I know it was actually, well, we don't know, but it was probably Joffrey or even Littlefinger, right? So it wasn't Cersei or Jaime or any of them, but he even is going to equivalate that to it. So it's really, it just show like how there's so much layering going on to this mystery outside of what even Ned has kind of figured out. But at this later in the afternoon, Ned summons Fat Tom, who is now the captain of the guard. Again, it shows how weak Ned's guard is, right? Ned's gone from, Alan and Jory and all these other people to now he's, Tom. To Fat Tom, where already was actively making fun of him, how bad of a guard he was. So it just kind of shows you how weakened the guard has become. And again, we know, like, he was loyal, right? Fat Tom is loyal, but he was such a big downgrade. He was 50 years old. He's not like a prime guy as a knight. Like, he's not a prime swordsman right now. And again, Ned at this point questions to send away 20 of his best swords. Again, so this is the biggest difference, right? Not only did Ned send away 20 of his men, he sent away 20 of his best men. But Ned asked Tom to take him to the Godswood, and Tom asks if that is wise, given the state of his leg. But Ned says probably not, but it is necessary. And with Tom and another man, they help him descend the Tower of the Hand. Ned also then tells Tom to double the guard, which Tom is very anxious about, given that, like, why are we doubling the guard? Like, is the situation getting that bad? And also, we don't have the men to do so. But Ned says, you're going to have to make do, right? It's just for a short while, lengthen the watches, whatever you got to do. But Tom says, might I ask why? And Ned says, best not. Again, Ned just being smart. Don't allow more people to know what's going on. Makes sense. Don't let those rumors spread. Ned notes how the Godswood was always empty. Again, people in the South do not believe in the old gods, and so it makes a lot of sense. It makes even more sense why Sansa would want to come here as well. Giving her, a little bit of a look into home, as well as just being able to be alone, right? But Ned was sat next to a heart tree with his leg on fire. Again, interesting that he's placed next to a heart tree. He then gives a letter to Tom to deliver with the Stark sigil on it. And Tom looks very anxious at this because it looks at who this is to and who it's addressed to. And you see a bit of nervousness go on Tom. But Ned tells him to deliver the letter. He did not know how long he had been waiting, but he felt more at peace here. Again, this is a bit more of the north. He felt a little bit more at home. He felt a bit of his strength returning. Again, I noted, could this be seen as the old gods giving favor to Ned in his moment, or in this moment, or the idea of blind faith having some sort of psychological effect on Ned? We see that all of the time when it comes to religion, specifically in this world, whether it's the drowned god, R'hllor, whatever. But that'll get us into page 485. Ned notes that she came to him at sunset, dressing more plainly and arriving alone as he had bid her. She removed her hood, and he saw the great bruise from where Robert had struck her. Cersei asks, why here? And Ned says, so the gods can see us. She sat in the grass behind him, and Ned notes her beauty and how every move she made was graceful and elegant. Again, at this point, we know that Cersei is going to try and seduce Ned, so this is really just part of that, right? Ned, she is trying to gain sympathy based upon her looks and things of that nature. And it's kind of right now Cersei's plan to win him over to her side. Like she did with Sansa, it's the same idea here. And we always see this throughout even Feast for Crows, that Cersei's someone that uses her physical appearance, her body, to try and gain men over to her side. Ned then says he knows the truth for why Jon Arryn died. And this is interesting because we know that Cersei was not involved in Jon Arryn's his death or his murder at all. So for Cersei, might come off a little weird because Cersei knows what Ned is referring to, but at the same time, she wasn't involved in Jon Arryn dying, so it kind of comes off a little weird. But Cersei watched his face warily, but says, do you? Is that why you called me here? To pose me riddles or to seize me like Catelyn did Tyrion? And Ned responds, if you truly thought that, you would never have come, which is, again, true in fairness to Cersei. Again, Cersei would never have come here if she thought like Ned was going to capture her. And again, that's not really Ned's way to begin with. So, yeah. But at this, Ned touches Cersei's cheek where Robert had hit her and asks if he had done this before. Cersei notes that once or twice and shies away from his touch, but notes that it was never on the face. If he would have, Jaime would have killed him, even if it meant his life. She continues stating that her brother is worth 100 of his friend Robert. And at this, Ned plays his card, right? He's kind of tired of the chit-chat and he's going straight for the jugular. He says, your brother or your lover, which in fairness I found is kind of a funny line, just given the fact that, like, it's the same thing. Like, Jaime is both her brother and her lover, so like it's not either or, it's just both. But I did find that kind of funny when you read that as a statement. Cersei did not even shy away from this, and honestly, why would she, right? There are no witnesses, there's no real reason to lie. She also she's not even sure really if Ned actually has any proof of this, or it's just basically going to go off of he said, she said. And also, I think the other thing is, like, Cersei realizes that Ned has already kind of come to this conclusion, so why deny it, right? Like, why even go in this dance? There's no real point. She continues stating, why not? The Targaryens married brothers to sisters for, say, 300 years. But honestly, it probably went on even further back than that. Again, that's 300 years just based upon, like, them being ruling. But we don't know how far that even went back when it comes to, like, them being in Valyria and such and all that. But she continues stating that Jaime and Cersei are more than just siblings. They are one person in two bodies. Once again, pointing to this idea that Cersei is very narcissistic. Like, the reason she likes Jaime is because he looks like her. And so it's like her sleeping with herself, which is really weird. But Cersei says they shared a womb together, and the Maester had said Jaime had come out holding her foot. Again, it kind of actually points to like Cersei and Jaime's relationship as well, where Jaime is always kind of dogging after Cersei, and we're going to see that eventually break in Feast for Crows, but that is kind of how the situation is at the moment. And I want to just say this, like, this last line is super disgusting, but Cersei says she feels whole when he is in me. Wow, very suspicious line there. But I want to go back to kind of the whole idea of her justification for her relationship with Jaime. She's not exactly wrong, right? Like, given the standard that's been set by the Targaryens, they are the ruling class. Now, the difference is that the Targaryens were able to get away with it a lot because of the dragons, right? They had the power to establish their rule. And so they also viewed themselves as, like, not gods, but not humans. Like, they were above that, like almost like demigods, I guess you would kind of look at them as this higher being over humans. Is it's really where a lot of that came from, especially when you look at characters like Visenya and Maegor. They were kind of proponents of this quite a lot. And so the logic here kind of falls apart when you look at it that from that, because the Lannisters don't really are not really compared to that by the common people. They also don't really have like the power to get away with that, right? All public perception is going to shift on them because of something like this. So it's a decent argument based upon like precedent that has been set before. When you look at morality, the actual health problems, not a very good idea. But that'll get us into page 486. Ned then starts saying, "My son Bran, but is cut off," as Cersei says that he saw. Cersei then asks that he loves his children, does he not? And again, Ned is at least pleased she is not shying away from the truth. Again, that gains actually quite a little bit of respect from Ned, but again, Ned really has to understand the situation. Like, Cersei has no reason to lie here, right? There's just no point. But what is interesting to think about here is that Ned thinks that Cersei sent the assassin, which we know is not true, and I talked about that a little bit early on. But more importantly for Ned, we think about again the tourney, right? So if we go all the way back to the tourney for the hand, Robert had asked Ned this exact same question. And Ned says the same thing as he said back then, with all of his heart. And Cersei responds, "No less than I do mine." And again, it really shows a lot of what Cersei's motivations are, like why she does certain things, right? She tried to kill Bran, or I guess Jaime did, to protect her children from the secret being revealed and all of these things. But Ned then has a very interesting line. He thinks, what would he do if it was between a child he did not know against the life of his own children? Or what would Kat do against her own line and Jon? He wished he would never know. And this is great foreshadowing for a lot of things, right? Because Ned understands that Catelyn, again, is not like Jon, but it's really weird to think about this given that Jon is at the wall at this point. So, like, he won't have a line. There is no Jon line, right? Jon cannot have kids. So it's very interesting to think that Ned thinks in a world where Jon did have some sort of line, what would that do? How would that coincide with Catelyn and her own kids? So it's great, again, foreshadowing for Robb's will, the argument that Robb and Catelyn will have later in the books. So it's great for that, but it's also interesting to, like, the moral dilemma that Ned has here. Like, if Ned was in a similar situation where, you know, for some reason he had to kill a kid because it was between his kids and that kid, what would Ned do? That's a great little mini, like, morality argument there. But Ned then notes that all three are Jaime's, and Cersei responds, "Thank the gods." Ned thinks to himself how Jon had stated the seed is strong on his deathbed. Again, really nice tie-in to, again, the whole, like, eerie plot that we got with Catelyn, where she was questioning, it's like the seed is strong. And it kind of like comes full circle here. And he could not have been more right. And right here, we're really going to see specifically how Ned came to the conclusion that Joffrey, Tom, and Myrcella were Jaime and Cersei's. He's going to quote a little bit of examples from the past. But 90 years, Taya Lannister had married Gawain Baratheon, and their son had coal hair and was a bigger child. And even 30 years earlier than that, a male Lannister had taken a female Baratheon, and the black hair had always taken priority over the golden hair. Again, makes a lot of sense. Even when we look at a character like Rhaenys Targaryen on, you know, House of the Dragon era, Rhaenys Targaryen is someone that doesn't look like she does on the show. She has more of the Baratheon, like, features more than she does the actual Targaryen features. Ned then asks how, over all the years, has she not had a child with Robert? Cersei defiantly notes that he had gotten her with child once, but Jaime had found someone to cleanse her. And Robert did not even know. Cersei could barely stand for her even to touch her anymore, and he had not been inside her for years. Whenever Robert left his whores and stumbled into her bed, she would do other things to try and please him, and he was so drunk that he would not remember them in the morning. Again, really fucked up. Like, a whole situation in which Robert is so clueless, right? It shows, again, for one, how Robert is just not paying attention to the situation around him, but two, like, how bad the relationship between Cersei and Robert has gotten, where Cersei, you know, cares so much about her kids, but yet she's willing to kill her own child. It's kind of crazy, right? So Ned thinks, how could they be so blind? It was there in front of them the entire time, which is kind of weird coming from Ned. Like, as though Ned, like, he had everything laid out for him, all of this evidence that even he was getting helped by characters like Varys and Littlefinger, and yet it took him this long to figure it out. Like, Sansa was actually the one that, like, really actually figured it out for Ned. Ned himself didn't really figure it out. And so when you think about all these other people, like, how could they have not figured it out? It is kind of interesting that he thinks that, given, like, how he came to that rationalization. But that gets into page 487. Ned felt sick by this conversation, but asked Cersei, when Robert came to his throne, he was every inch the king. 1,000 other women would have loved him. What did he do to make you hate him so? Which is a great point, because Robert is this, like, prototypical guy that, you know, I think most women would like. He was really tall. He was very muscular. He was described as being very good looking. He was, like, he didn't have a dual personality either. He was a fun guy, it would appear. The women seemed to love Robert. So what went wrong? As she says this, her eyes burned green. She looked every bit the lioness, and she notes how on their wedding night, while he was on top of her, he whispered in her ear, Lyanna. And this is the line to me that really perfectly describes Robert, how everything in his life went wrong. This line does so much for actually understanding who Robert is as a person. You know, I've done a couple, like, live streams or videos where I've talked about Robert and given, like, a character analysis of him. And this is a line that I very often, you know, cite because it makes you understand why this relationship broke down. It makes you understand a lot about why Robert became an alcoholic, a drunk, why he hates Rhaegar so much, because for him, he had this idea of who Lyanna was, and he wanted her so bad that nothing could really fill that void. And it goes even further when you look at Cersei, because now for Cersei, she's never going to be able to fill that Lyanna role, right? Cersei, you know, in this part of her life was described as one of the most beautiful women in all of Westeros, and even she could not fill that void for Robert. But Ned, once again, thinks of the pale blue roses, again, that are associated with Lyanna, which, again, I want you guys to remember they're very important for other parts of the story when we eventually get there. But again, think about how many times Ned has thought of these pale blue roses when it comes to Lyanna. He says he does not know who he pities more of the two of them. Cersei, once again, being the lioness, seems amused by this. She does not desire his pity. But Ned then tells her, you know what I must do. And Cersei, this is when she tries playing her card. She responds, must. You don't really have to do anything, right? Like, Ned is the hand of the king. He could let this go and other things could happen. But Cersei starts to again try to seduce Ned, touching his leg, and begins to try and seduce him, touching his face and hair, moving up his leg, all the while saying that a true man does what he wills, not what he must. Continuing that, Joffrey will not come of age for years and could use a strong hand. And the realm needs one, and the country does not need war, and she, least of all, does not want it. She finishes saying, if friends can turn to enemies, why can't enemies become friends? If Ned is kind to her, he will not regret it. And now this is all, to me, a pretty big lie, right? We know from based upon how Cersei is in Feast, that Cersei is someone that wants basically Ned to be a yes man. She wants Ned to just go along with everything Cersei is going to do, and that's not going to happen, right? Because you have to remember, Cersei already has the plan in motion to try and get Robert to die. It's a very risky plan. Who knows if it's going to work? And so Cersei is kind of throwing a Hail Mary out here, trying to get Ned on her side, just as maybe a backup plan. And the thing is, even if this would have worked, I still think it's very possible that Cersei would have tried to get Ned killed after that anyway, because it just didn't make any sense to keep someone like Ned alive who has all of this vital information that could send the Lannister dynasty tumbling down. And Ned, again, is not someone that's going to be seduced, right? He's someone that has a wife. He is someone that, you know, he's way above this, right? And Cersei probably knew that, but maybe she thought, I'm so good looking, I'm so narcissistic that I can get through to him. But Ned throws it in her face and asks if she gave Jon Arryn the same offer, which is just like, damn, okay, Ned, you need to calm down a little bit, but he's got no chill. which is interesting again, because Cersei had nothing to do with Jon's death outside of letting Pycelle let him die from the poison, which is, again, a great point. Like, Cersei and Jon didn't have this kind of conversation, so it is a little interesting, but still, Ned fires back. Cersei then slaps him, but Ned again is like having no chill right now. He's like, I will wear this as a badge of honor, like, you know, she did with Robert, which I think is really funny. Like, he just is just, he's kind of just roasting Cersei right now, in my opinion. But Cersei now tries to make Ned angry. So this is actually a very famous line when you come to look at theories about Jon's parentage, like, given, you know, some people think this is a line for Ned and Ashara. I am someone that actually thinks this discounts Ned and Ashara a little bit, but she tries to make Ned angry, make him do something irrational. She says, honor, don't play the honorable lord with her. She knows he has a bastard. Who was she? A Dornish peasant who he raped while her holdfast burned, a whore, a Shara Dane, again, who apparently killed herself because of either Ned killing her brother or stealing her child, which we know is not the case at all in either of those situations. But again, I want you guys to note, just, you know, as we're going through this, Cersei basically just spouts any rumor that she's heard about Ned and just tries to make him angry. But again, let's look at the next line, right? This is the next line directly after this. Ned is keeping his cool here. He's not angry. Like, in his POV, he's not upset by what was just said. He's not, you know, any of that, right? He does not even think of Ashara in this POV. Like, and this is the thing with Ned, right? And Ned never once thinks about Ashara. So I think this is a very interesting line to look at when looking at Ashara and Ned's relationship, because it doesn't really seem like in this situation it's that deep. Right? Like, Ned doesn't have any type of reaction to this. But he coolly responds, for a start, I do not kill children, and that he is only going to say this once. When the king returns, he will lay all this out to him, and she and the children must be gone, but not to Casterly Rock, but to Essos in exile, which I really don't think is actually the good advice from Ned. Like, given that Robert will try and find Cersei, like, will hunt them down to the ends of the earth, like, even worse than Viserys and Dany, for instance, going into exile doesn't make any sense. Like, Casterly Rock does make the most sense for their protection. It's just not going to work, right? I think Cersei realizes that. Like, there's no hiding, right? There's no running. Like, she has to fight this regardless of if she is in a good position right now or not. And another thing I think would have been interesting is, like, look at the past, right? Letting, you know, another claimant leave and go into exile is not a good idea. Like, think about the whole Blackfyre situation. That caused generations of death and carnage for the Targaryen house or the Targaryen dynasty. So I don't think that was a good idea anyway to suggest from Ned, but I understand why he's doing so, right? That's the whole point. So many people have an issue with Ned telling Cersei all this, but in reality, how is Ned supposed to predict that Robert's going to die hunting when he goes hunting all the time? That's the whole key point here. And Cersei notes that exile is a bitter cup to drink from. Ned notes it was a sweeter cup than Tywin had served Rhaegar's children. It was still a bitter memory for Ned. He tells her that she should take her brothers and Tywin with her, and his gold will buy her swords and comfort to protect her. Even then, it might not be enough with Robert's wrath that will follow. Again, it's not going to be enough, right? Robert would come and kill them. Again, I will point out here, Cersei really has no reason to go into exile, right? Like, there's just no point to do that. The queen then stood and says, what about her wrath? Cersei then recounts the story of how Ned had found Jaime on the Iron Throne and made it yield it up. This was his moment. All he needed to do was to climb those steps and sit. What a sad mistake. Now, something I want to point out here before we get into, like, the big part of this chapter, the ending and all that. I don't know how that would have gone, because at this point of the war, it definitely seems like there was a plan put in place that Robert was to become king, right? Robert had the best claim. Robert was the figurehead of the entire rebellion. Yes, Ned had more personal tragedy happen to him. He was the most affected. His sister has been captured. Brandon and his father have died. You know, he has lost a lot of his family. So, you know, you can make an argument there. But if the rebellion had come and Ned had declared himself king, I don't know how that would have gone down. Like, maybe Cersei's right that they would have allowed him to sit the Iron Throne. Maybe it'd be like, okay, well, he's lost so much, we'll just allow him to have this. You know, why not? But I think a lot of people also would have gone, okay, Ned has no claim to this throne. And didn't we already figure out it was going to be Robert at this point? So, yeah, I think a lot of interesting points here, but I don't know if it was that simple as Cersei makes it. But again, Cersei kind of shows what she's all about here in this moment that we look at with like Feast for Crows. She values power over everything. Cersei would have died to have the opportunity that Ned has. And again, Cersei's motivated by greed. Ned then notes he has made more mistakes than she knows. And again, I noted this is probably thinking about stuff in Robert's Rebellion, things that happened during that time period. But let's continue. But he notes that that was not one of his mistakes. Cersei then has her famous line that you guys hear in pretty much every single video on this channel. Oh, but it was. When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. There is no middle ground. She turned and left with her hood up and the stars out. Which begs a question. Ned cannot get up. When will his guards come for him? I found that very interesting. Like, because it's like Ned like can't leave. There's no guards around him. Again, this is a very private conversation. Like, if Cersei really wanted to, she actually probably could have killed Ned in this situation, but you know. But when are the guards going to come in? Like, when Cersei leaves, do the guards go, okay, well, it's our time now. It's time, guys. You know, Fat Tom's like, all right, boys, it's our time. I don't know. I found that very interesting at the end of this chapter. It's something that does not matter whatsoever. It's not a plot hole or anything. It's just found really, really interesting. But yeah, thank you guys all for watching. Really happy to have finally gotten to Ned 12. Again, one of my favorite chapters in the first book, and we're really going to start heating up. We've got a very good Dany chapter. I think Dany's next, and then we're back to Ned again. But we're getting very close to some really important things. So thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.